So in part 1 of this video series, I showed you a very simple gambit to play against the French defense, beginning with the move pawn to e4 and after pawn to e6. I recommended a different move in this position instead of pawn to d4. Just go knight to f3 because after all, French players will always push pawn to d5 on the second move, intending to go pawn to c5 next, maybe because this is what they are used to, and now it is time for you to surprise them with the move pawn to d3, because after this you are intending to transpose into the Tennison Gambit, counter-attacking the pawn on e4, and we saw that most of the time black players would take on d3, after which you take back with your light squared bishop, and this is where we looked at the move pawn to h6 in part 1, where you can finish off your opponent very quickly if they are not careful like this, or if they don't play knight to f6 and let's say they go queen f6. We looked at this brilliant sacrifice as well, where they may end up losing their queen in this way. And we also looked at a very beautiful checkmate which can happen after pawn to g6, then you sacrifice your bishop, and then after pawn takes, you take back with your queen, and then after king d7, the top played move in the Lichess database, you simply met your opponent like this. So this is what we looked at in part 1 of this video series before we started talking about the knight to f6 line, which we are looking at in today's video in more detail. So after you go d3 and then black takes your e4 pawn, you still go knight g5, going back into the Tennison Gambit so that after pawn takes, again you take back with your light squared bishop. So the question that begs to be answered in today's video is, what if black plays knight to f6, which I discussed briefly in my previous video on this topic. So if you remember very well, I said whenever you see knight to f6, always think of knight c3. In other words, knight f6 goes together with knight c3 in this anti-French Tennison Gambit. So you just go knight c3, and the reason is, in case pawn to h6 is played, you have a place where to put your knight, and in case of bishop b4 pin, you always have bishop d2, and whatever happens, you will retreat your g knight to e4. Simple. But let's say black plays bishop e7 this time, which is the top played move, by the way. Remember, you have two squares where you can develop your queen. Given a chance, you always want to put your queen on f3, especially if black hasn't yet developed knight c6. For example, queen f3 first. If pawn to h6, thanks to your queen's knight sitting on c3, because you have knight ge4. Again, if knight takes, you can simply take back with any piece that you like, by the way. That's the flexibility that I'm talking about. But in bullet, I like playing queen takes e4. Even in blitz, because most of my opponents seem to lack patience, they castle short, forgetting that I have mate in one. So that's one beautiful thing I like about this gambit, you guys. It's the flexibility to come up with more interesting strategies. Anyway, let's just say after queen takes e4, black plays pawn to f5. Well, you can simply retreat your queen on e2, preparing to go queen h5 check. If they castle short, you simply develop your bishop on e3. So at an expense of one pawn, you have all these many open lines with better attacking opportunities, guys. So it's all about the flexibility. The French defense is closed in its nature. French defense players want the game to be closed. So you need to find a way to open it, make the game become more aggressive, and trust me, they are going to blunder in one way or another. Once again, it's not every time your opponent will always take your g knight on e4 after h6 and knight g e4. Remember, we looked at knight takes e4. It's not every time you're going to see your opponents, simplifying the game that way. In fact, they like keeping the tension, as I said. You'll see the moves knight c6, for example, or even something like knight d5 in this position. Just go bishop d2. Just a logical move. If knight c6 is played, there are so many things we can do, castle long or castle short, but here I like queen g3, putting more pressure on the g7 pawn. So many things that you can do, by the way. Pawn to g6 may be played. You simply go bishop b5, because what else? Pinning the knight is good. They play bishop d7. You castle long. So this is all your initiative. a6, bishop a4, b5 may be played, bishop b3. You just keep the tension and see the mobility that you have. Bishop h4, play queen d3 first. If knight c b4, this is when you go queen f3. Again, the flexibility to keep on attacking and play actively is the reason why I like this Tennison Gambit against the French. So this is all that you can expect in the knight to f6 line against your Tennison Gambit. So against knight to f6, always remember to go knight c3. Now one more line, let's say black becomes rock solid and continues to play solidly with knight c6. Again, whenever you see knight c6, what did I say? Always think of knight e5 or knight b4. They always want to get rid of your bishop. That's why if you go queen f3, they'll play knight e5. So again, you can go bishop d2, queen e2, or knight g e4, whatever strategy you come up with, or even castle shot, just as an example. So they always play knight e5, finding a way to get rid of your light squared bishop. What I like doing against this is not to take back with my c pawn. Let me show you how that goes. So I play queen e2 after knight takes d3. I don't take back with my queen or my pawn. I just pin that knight to the queen and black can't escape this attack. If bishop d6, I like taking this knight with my rook. So this is one important move to remember, you guys, whenever you notice the queen's knight attack on your light squared bishop. So you better prepare for rook takes d3. Castle shot may be played. You go knight g e4 again, preparing to go bishop g5 next. Maybe if knight takes e4, you take back. Pawn to f5 is always a weakness. You have knight g3 if you want, or knight back to c3. If pawn to e5, paving way for the light squared bishop, you simply go bishop e3, just a developmental move. If bishop f5, you go bishop c5. It's up to you to come up with a strategy that works for you guys. So if you want to study more, you can simply head to my Patreon page where I post detailed studies. Let's look at the bishop e7 line. So again, after pawn to e4 and then e6, the French defense, you remember to go knight to f3 because you know they always go pawn to d5. I mean, what else? So you go d3 once again. After d takes e4, you go knight g5. The top played move is e takes d3. You take back with your bishop. And so we just finished looking at the h6 line and the knight to f6 line. But what if black plays bishop e7, attacking your knight right away? Look, yes, the main goal is to take the pawn on h7, but there's no knight takes h7 here because there's just too much pressure on the g5 square. You will have no way to rescue your knight after something like pawn to g6. So you're now left with two options. The main one is to retreat your knight to e4, or the move that I like, pawn to h4, an attacking move, allowing black to blunder one more time with a move, pawn to h6. But let's just see what happens if black takes your knight first. This is not advisable because black is helping you to open your h file for your king's rook. For example, the game may continue as follows. Pawn to g6, you go knight c3, knight e7, maybe they're planning to castle shot, or you can just go queen e2, anything, even knight e4 is playable according to your plan. So knight b c6, again, what did we say about knight c6? Always think of this and this, so you must prepare for that. However, you can go knight e4 if you want, preparing to play knight f6 check. Nothing can stop you from doing that, by the way. After the king moves, you rescue your queen somehow, and here is a simple plan for you. Anyway, so that's just one of the possibilities that may happen after you play pawn to h4. But it's not every time you're going to see your opponent or your opponents taking on g5 like that. The main reason of going pawn to h4 is to invite the move pawn to h6 by black, which loses again due to queen h5. Again, if queen f6, you have queen takes f7 check. If bishop takes g5, once again, you have hg. Black can't take your pawn because they will lose their rook on h8. So they play queen d5, the top played move in this position. You can see in the Delicious database. But you can just go knight c3 attacking the queen. If queen e5 check, you block with your other bishop on e3. Next, you just want to castle long. By the way, g6 doesn't work due to bishop takes once again. Yes, you sacrifice your piece because you know you have a massive attack coming. If king e7, for example, you can still castle long. If black tries to exchange queens, you have queen g7 check, and on the next move, you win their rook on h8. If bishop d7, you have g takes h6. I mean, what else? Because next you want to go bishop g5 check. If knight c6, just a developing move, you have bishop g5 check. And it's just a matter of time before you find the right time to checkmate your opponent like this. Their knight on f6 is pinned to the king. So this would be a funny checkmate. Instead of going king d8, if they play king e8, you just take their rook on h8 with check. And after this, you give them another check. And after this again, you just take the knight and this is simply game over. Anyway, back to the initial position of our Tennison Gambit against the French defense. Still looking at the bishop e7 line. Instead of retreating your knight on e4, I suggest you play this tricky move, pawn to h4, inviting pawn to h6. If they don't play that, and let's say they go knight to f6, what did I say about knight to f6, guys? If you remember very well, I said because of the possibility of h6 this time, you want to retreat your g knight to e4. So this is where you play knight c3. Knight to f6 goes together with knight c3 in most of these lines, so that if h6, you can safely retreat your knight back to e4. Again, if knight takes, you will take back with your queen's knight. Now, top players don't always take, they like keeping tension, so that's why you're going to see them playing knight c6. Again, it's up to you to go queen f3, or even better queen e2 to avoid knight e5. By the way, even queen f3 is okay. Just to show you, if knight e5 comes, you can still go queen g3. Even though black will manage to isolate your pawn, you're still attacking the g7 pawn. Now, let's look at the last decline variation. After e4, e6, knight to f3, and pawn to d5. At this point, black is thinking you want to play the normal two knights attack, which grandmasters play in classical games. But after seeing pawn to d3, they realize that you want to turn this into the Tennison Gambit. So you will see most of your opponents not taking on e4 right away. This happens to me like 80% of the times against 2400s, but some take the first pawn, but after knight g5, they don't take the second pawn. Instead, they play knight to f6, trying to keep things complicated. By the way, if you take, they are going to take your queen, making you lose the right to castle. So you don't have to do that. Just continue with knight c3. Remember, knight to f6 goes together with knight c3. In case of pawn to h6, you have knight g takes e4. That's the idea. Again, they'll play bishop b4, trying to be solid. What do you do against this pin? You simply unpin your knight. You don't want to entertain pins in chess, given a chance. And only by this time is when you're going to see them taking on d3, because they are tired of waiting. Now you can take back with your bishop once again. And if pawn to h6, you know what to do. We talked about this. If they castle short this time, you want to develop your queen on f3 at best, or at worst on e2. So let's say queen f3. If knight c6, you know they are preparing for this or this. So you go queen g3 if you want, or castle long, anything. If pawn to h6, you retreat your knight. Things are self-explanatory, by the way. If knight takes e4, you always want to take that knight with a bishop, but it doesn't matter even if you take that knight with a knight. So let's just say bishop takes. Bishop d6 is played. f4. This would just be anyone's game with perfect play. It's just one of those games where the best planner will obviously win. There are certain times when some of your opponents won't even take the e4 pawn at all after you play this move, d3. Instead of taking the pawn on e4, they would rather ignore you and play pawn to c5, just continuing their French defense ideas. Against this, there's a beautiful, very beautiful trap that I learned in the Sicilian defense. It's like black started with pawn to c5 for the first move. What I do against this is I just play knight c3. If pawn to d4, I have knight e2 and knight g3 in the near future. If d takes e4, which is the main area of my mate, I just go knight g5. Continuing with my Tennison Gambit ideas, I just want to recapture the pawn. If e takes d3, the top played move, I just take back with my bishop. Once again, if pawn to h6, I have queen h5. So black plays knight to f6, the top played move, preparing for pawn to h6 next. But after this, I like playing this sneaky move, you guys. Bishop e3 could be the first and last time you're seeing this move. My opponents play pawn to h6, trying to get rid of my knight, but after this, I just go ahead and sacrifice my knight on f7, double attacking the queen and the rook on h8. After king takes f7, I go bishop g6, just like what we do in the typical Tennison Gambit. And next, I'm gonna grab the free queen on d8. In case of king e7 this time, in an effort to hold on to their queen. Now you see the purpose of playing bishop e3 is to simply go bishop takes c5 check, which is almost checkmate, because the only move is queen d6, after which I take the queen as well, and that's checkmate.